Well, I hope I live up to the hype, dude. Jeez. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here with you in Framingham and online, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Nate Killian. I'm on staff here at FCC. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Communications, but I'm also part of the teaching team here, which is why I'm up here today. And real quick before we dive in, I know a lot of us could come in here today feeling stressed, on edge, fearful, in response to the events that took place yesterday. I'm feeling that too. And something for me that does help me when I feel this way, help me find some comfort, is actually when I do sit down and I get into the Word, and honestly, when I watch some TV shows and movies. It helps me escape my world a little bit. And I'm not just saying that for some corny transition. I really do mean that. Like, I'm glad we're getting into this today, okay? Because we are in our summer movie series, and I love our summer movie series because I am a movie nerd. I love movies. I love watching movies. I love talking about movies. And what we do in this series is we take a look at culturally relevant TV shows and movies. We watch clips from those TV shows and movies, and then we contrast them with different passages or ideas from the Bible in order to grow in our understanding of the Bible, to grow in our understanding of who Jesus is, and also just to grow in our faith. And so today, the movie that we're going to be taking a look at is the Super Mario Brothers movie, dude. Heck yeah. Who's seen this before? A couple people with good taste, I see. All right. Now, I'm not only a movie nerd, okay? I'm a little bit of a video game nerd as well. And for those who don't know, Mario, that guy with the red hat in the middle there, is originally from one of the largest video game franchises in the world. And growing up, I played a ton of these games. I played a lot of Mario. I played pretty much all these games, all the way back in the 90s on my Super Nintendo to today playing my Nintendo Switch. My wife and I love to play Mario Party, which is not a game when we play, fierce competition, okay? But Mario was a big part of my childhood. It was a way for me and my friends to connect. It was also a way for me to just get some alone time in while I game. And when I saw that this movie was coming out, I was so excited. I was so excited because I couldn't wait to see how they were going to take this video game franchise and depict it in a cinematic story. I'm also just a really big fan of animated movies. I love animated movies because all the little details in an animated movie are intentional. Somebody had to design every little detail and place it in its specific spot. And I couldn't wait to see all the little details they were going to pack into this movie. And when that day finally came where I was able to see the Super Mario Brothers movie, I was not disappointed. I was blown away. I loved this movie. Not only was it funny and entertaining, but it was packed full of callbacks to the video games. Every single scene had all these little details, connections to the old games. This was a movie for the fans. And for me, as a fan, every little detail or hyperlink or connection that I could pick up on made my experience watching the movie that much more enjoyable. And so like every movie nerd, when I was done watching the movie, I couldn't wait to talk about it. I just wanted to talk to anybody who saw the movie. I would go to my friends and go, dude, I saw that you saw the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I loved when they did this. I loved this scene. What did you think? And they would be like, it was all right. It was kind of cool. It was kind of confusing and weird at some points, but, it was whatever, man. It's just a movie. And naturally, I'm appalled by this, right? But I take a step back, and I think to myself, I think to ask them, did you play the Mario video games? Are you familiar with Mario's backstory? And 9 times out of 10, the answer I got was no. And suddenly it all made sense. Not being familiar with the Mario video games or Mario's backstory would impact your experience watching this movie. You'd miss all the connections. You'd miss all the callbacks. You would miss 75% of the reason that this movie was good. I realized how important it was to play the old games, to know the backstory, in order to properly enjoy and understand this movie. And as I reflected on that, this thought came to me. It is exactly the same when we read the Bible. The Bible is filled with hyperlinks, callbacks, and connection points. And today when I use these words, this is what I mean. In the Bible, there are specific words, phrases, and passages that are intentionally connected and referencing other parts of the Bible. to help you understand the point, to make a point, and to help you understand what's happening. Does anybody want to take a guess at how many hyperlinks there are in the Bible? There are over 63,000 hyperlinks in the Bible. And in this image right here, every single line you see up there represents a single Bible verse connecting to another Bible verse. And I love this about the Bible. This makes the Bible so much fun to read. This helps me grow in my understanding of who Jesus is, and this fascinates me. I have had moments where I was studying the Bible and I found a connection that I thought was so cool, I nearly fell out of my chair. I'm not even joking about that. Some of my friends were there when it happened, okay? Now imagine reading the Bible and not picking up on a single hyperlink. When you read the Bible and you start to pick up on these hyperlinks, you understand the backstory, what you're reading will start to take on a new level of meaning. Knowing or not knowing the hyperlinks in the Bible will impact your experience reading it. And so what I want to do today is I want to have a little fun. I want to nerd out about the Super Mario Brothers movie. I want to nerd out about some video games, and I want to nerd out about the Bible. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to look at different hyperlinks. We're going to look at some scenes from the Super Mario Brothers movie, and then we're going to break down the hyperlinks in each scene. Then we're going to read some passages from the Bible and break down the hyperlinks in there. And we're going to do this by traveling through 3 different levels. Easy, medium, and hard. Okay? But before we do any of that, I'm going to pray. Heavenly Father, God, thank you for the gift of story. Thank you for things like TV shows and movies, Lord. Thank you that you are so creative and you are the original storyteller and you have blessed us with such a powerful, powerful tool that we get to enjoy. Lord, I pray today that you would help us grow in our understanding of who you are, Jesus, the understanding of your word, and God, that you would speak through me and that I would not get in the way. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. All right, folks. Let's get into level 1. Okay? We're going to look at our first scene from the Super Mario Brothers movie, and then we're going to unpack all the hyperlinks. Okay? Here we go.
Mario, you're a dead man! Split up!
Mario!
Time to die, Mario! See ya!
Okay. That got a round of applause in Hopkinton. Can you believe that? Jeez. All right. We just saw our first hyperlink, okay, or our first scene. What's going on here? Mario and his crew, they're driving around in what appears to be go-karts, and they're driving on a road made of rainbows. Now, what's that all about? This scene is a direct hyperlink to the iconic video game Mario Kart. Mario Kart's like a household name, right? Like everybody knows Mario Kart. They made 14 different Mario Karts. This is one of the most successful parts of the Mario video game franchise. So as a fan of these games, seeing this scene in the movie was, one, kind of expected, because like I said, it's such a significant part of Mario's backstory. But two, it was so cool as a fan of these games to see this iconic part of the franchise become a significant plot point in the movie. And what's even more cool as a fan of the games is when I recognize that this is from the game, and then I can go through and find all these little hyperlinks that are packed in there. So for example, Mario's driving on his iconic cart from the games. They're driving on Rainbow Road, the iconic map that's in every single video game. Mario's throwing turtle shells, knocking carts off the road. The same way in the game, you can collect items, throw them at your opponents to knock them off the road or cause them to spin out so you can pass them. And the last hyperlink we're going to talk about, which is not the only one, there's many more, but we don't have time for all those, is that one at the end where Mario jumps from the back of the cart and he lands in the back of Donkey Kong's cart. A direct nod to Mario Kart Double Dash. Andrew Kime knows what I'm talking about. Big Mario Kart guy. I'm a big nerd, okay? In case you couldn't tell. But as a fan of the games, it made this scene in all its little details that much more exciting. All this to say, this is a hyperlink that you actually may be able to get on your own without ever necessarily playing the games, right? You might watch this movie, see this scene, and go, oh, I know what that is. My kids play Mario Kart. Or, oh, I have some friends that play Mario Kart. I saw a commercial about this once, right? You might be able to make that connection without ever playing. Now, in the same way, there are hyperlinks in the Bible that even though you didn't necessarily study them and find them on your own, you could probably make the connection based on what someone else has told you. Specifically, there are hyperlinks that the Bible tells you. This is a hyperlink. So let's take a look at a level 1 hyperlink from the Bible. Now, real quick, something that most people probably know, right, without ever reading the Bible or studying it, is this. Oh, Adam? That's the guy who ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. That was the first sin, right? Most people tend to know things like this. Why do they know it? Because people talk about it. It's depicted in pop culture. It's depicted in art, old and new. It's depicted in TV shows and movies. People can be familiar with these things. The second thing that people are probably familiar with, right, is this, in theory. Oh, Jesus, that's the guy that died for everyone's sins, right? Why do people know that? Because in general, it's talked about in culture. It's depicted in pop culture. It's depicted in art, old and new. It's talked about in TVs and movies all the time. So in the same way, you can become familiar with these things without ever really studying the Bible. But did you know that there's actually a passage in the Bible that directly hyperlinks Adam and Jesus? The Bible lays this hyperlink out for you. So let's take a look at a passage from the book of Romans. So for context, real quick, Romans is a letter written by this guy named Paul. Paul is a Jesus follower, and he went around planting all these churches. And then he writes all these letters to these churches to help them become better followers of Jesus. And so Paul is writing to this church in Rome. And here's what's going on in Rome. The church has basically been made up of two different parts: non-Jewish Christians and Jewish Christians. Non-Jewish Christians taking the majority. And the non-Jewish Christians don't really care about the Old Testament. They don't really care about Moses. They don't really care about those old Jewish laws. Kind of understandably so, because they're not Jewish, right? They really only care about Jesus, not all that old stuff. And so one of the things that Paul is doing in this letter is he is connecting the Old Testament to Jesus. He's creating continuity between the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. He's highlighting why it's so important for the non-Jewish Christians to care about the Old Testament. And in this letter, he says this: when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. Yes, Paul sinned even before the law was given, but it was not counted as sin because there was not yet any law to break. Still, everyone died from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even those who did not disobey an explicit commandment of God, as Adam did. Now, Adam is a symbol, a representation of Christ who is yet to come. A little further down, he says this: yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous. So what is Paul doing? Paul is hyperlinking Jesus to the Old Testament. Specifically, he's hyperlinking Jesus to Adam. He's highlighting why it is so important for the non-Jewish Christians to know the Old Testament, to know the backstory. Paul is showing that, yes, Jesus and everything he did, that is the most important thing. But here's why it's so important. And if you were following along with the story, like the Jewish Christians were, they would see this and they would make this connection between Adam and Jesus. They would see the contrast. Jesus is everything that Adam was supposed to be. Adam was tempted in the garden and failed. Jesus was tempted in the garden and chose God's will. When you know the backstory, even if it's just a small little thing like this, it makes reading about Jesus all the more exciting. And then when you make this contrast, you can start to go through Scripture and find all these other little connections of Jesus and Adam. And it changes what you're reading. So, what makes this a level 1 hyperlink is that the Bible is literally telling you this is a hyperlink. Paul is flat out doing the work for you. So how can you find more hyperlinks in the Bible like this? Look for words like, as it was written. This is when a Bible author is using a passage from somewhere else in the Bible, anytime they say as it was written. So what you can do is you can go find that passage, read it, and then come back to what you're reading. Another thing to look for is when a Bible author refers to another person or character from the Bible or an event from the Bible. Go read about that person, go read about that event, and then come back to what you're reading and see if it changes your interpretation of what you're reading. All right, gang, that's level 1. Complete. Are we ready for level 2? Heck yeah. All right, let's do it. Second scene from Mario.
Get up, Mario!
Now you die. Huh. I'm a cat. Meow.
All right. This one's a little more subtle, okay? You'd have to do some digging to really find this one, especially if you're a younger person in the room. So in this scene, we see Mario. He's fighting a gorilla named Donkey Kong. They are fighting on what appears to be red construction beams, and Donkey Kong is throwing barrels at him. You might be wondering, well, like, what's the point of these two characters fighting? And also, like, what's up with the landscape, you know? In order to find this one, I have to take you back to 1981. Right behind me, this is the Donkey Kong video game from 1981. This is the very first Donkey Kong game, and it's the first time that Mario ever appeared in a video game. The game is simple. As you play as Mario, you have to scale to the top of this red construction building, avoiding all the miscellaneous objects like barrels that are being thrown by Donkey Kong, in order to get to the top to save a woman named Pauline. If anyone was thinking Princess Peach, that was crazy, right? Crazy. But then to win the game, you have to knock Donkey Kong all the way down to the bottom of the construction, just like we saw in that scene. So this scene is making a hyperlink back to the very origins of both of these characters. It's really subtle, but this hyperlink is painting a picture of the type of relationship that these two characters have. It ties you back to where they came from. And to notice this one, you'd have to think a little harder about what you're watching. You might see this scene and literally think, what is the significance of what I'm watching here? And with a quick Google search and a YouTube video, you'd be pointed to Donkey Kong from 1981. All right, level 2 in the Bible. Let's dive in. Let's take a look at a passage from the Gospel of Mark. So the Gospel of Mark is one of the 4 accounts we have about the life of Jesus. And at this point in the story, Jesus just got done feeding 5,000 people, only using 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Crazy miracle, right? And what Jesus does is he sends his disciples on in a boat ahead of him, and he stays on land to go up on a mountain to pray. And here's where we pick up in the story. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were all terrified when they saw him, but Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Now, initially reading this, and let's assume you don't have any backstory at all, you might think, well, Jesus could do some pretty cool stuff. I mean, he just fed 5,000 people, and now he's walking on water. That's so cool. This guy's a miracle worker. Now, I'm sure Jesus did feel really cool walking on water, no doubt. But Jesus isn't just walking on water to be cool. Actually, Jesus is doing a very specific miracle by walking on water. In fact, the disciples who knew their Bibles would see this and they would make a connection. They would make a hyperlink to a passage from the book of Job. Job is a book from the Old Testament, is a book of Hebrew poetry. And one of the core ideas that we get from the book of Job is this: we don't know why suffering happens in this life. But despite suffering, we can trust God in his character, that he is good, that he is just, and that he is mighty. And in this story, we follow this guy named Job, who for no real reason, despite being totally innocent, loses everything. He loses his family, he loses his wealth, he even loses his health. And he has these 3 friends who come alongside him during this suffering, and they try to explain to Job why this suffering is happening to him. They say things like, well, Job, you must have sinned, and now God is punishing you. And Job is wrestling with this. And in one of his responses to his friends, in a monologue, Job begins to describe God's mighty character. And he starts to talk about how no one is innocent compared to God because he is so wise. He is so mighty. He moves the mountains. If he really wanted to, he could cause the sun not to rise. He could cause the stars not to shine. And then Job says this: he alone has spread out the heavens and marches on the waves of the sea. He does great things too marvelous to understand. He performs countless miracles. Jesus isn't just doing something cool. He's making a statement. He's revealing his character. He's revealing his deity, that he is that mighty God in the flesh. And this is something the disciples would pick up on. So what makes this a level 2 hyperlink? Well, we need to remember actually one of our Bible study principles that we talked about in the last series. All of the Bible points to Jesus. Everything Jesus does is significant. So whenever we read about what Jesus is doing and saying, our radar for hyperlinks should turn on. So how do we go about finding them? Here's my recommendation for you. Get a study Bible. My study Bible has all these little notes in the bottom that whenever I read any passage or any verse, I can go down and I can read a little commentary on what this verse or passage is actually about, any connections or hyperlinks that might be packed into it. And so I can read and I can go see where the Old Testament passages are referred to, and I can go back, read those passages, and then come back to what I'm currently reading, and now what Jesus is saying and doing is making a lot more sense. Cool? Yeah. I think so, at least for me. We're going to get into level 3 now. How are we feeling about level 3? Woo, yeah. How are we feeling about level 3? Thank you. Okay, final boss. Here we go. Level 3. Let's watch this last clip from the Mario movie.
Wow, you were great.
I was great. Are you kidding me? You were great.
I am so glad we spent our life savings on this commercial.
That is not a commercial. That is cinema.
What about the accents? Is it too much? Too much?
It's perfect. Wahoo!
Okay, I'm going to trust you.
All right, our third scene, much shorter, right? A lot quicker. So in this shot, we see Mario and his brother Luigi, the guy in the green hat, talking about this commercial they just spent their life savings on, which is a move we should respect, by the way. And you might be drawn to pick up on the old guy there, right? And actually, the old guy, if you look closely, he's playing Donkey Kong from 1981. But that's not the hyperlink I'm talking about. I am talking about the old guy. Now, this shot's really quick. I think it's the only line we get from the old guy in the movie. I don't even think we ever get his name. But you could very easily glaze over this scene and just move on with the movie. You'd be like, okay, that was a little weird and random, but I'm going to keep going, right? What's significant about this scene is not what the old guy says, but how he says it. And if you really wanted to find the significance here, you would have to go deeper than just looking through the old video games. You'd have to go behind the scenes. You'd have to go to the production process. And then you can make the connection to the games, and then you can make the connection in the movie. Now, whenever I watch TV shows and movies, I like going on this app called IMDb. It's an app where I can see everyone who played a part in the creation of a movie. I can see who directed it, who wrote the movie, all the actors and actresses. And what I like to do is I go through all the actors and actresses and look at what other movies or TV shows have they been in, or what other video game characters have they voiced. And when you scroll through the credits, you'll get to this old guy, and you'll see that he was played by this man. This is Charles Martinet, the original voice of Mario throughout all of the video games. See, Mario in this movie is voiced by Chris Pratt. He's not voiced by Charles. But they managed to get the original voice of Mario into the movie. And this seems so small, right? This seems small, insignificant. But as a fan of the games, this is such a sentimental touch. This is such a great nod to the man who gave Mario his iconic voice, feel, and tone. He would set up such a significant part of the Mario brand for decades and decades and decades on into the future. But like I said, you'd have to dig pretty deep for it. You might just think it's weird and move on if you didn't pick up on it, right? But it'll make it that much more enjoyable. So, let's move on to our level 3 Bible hyperlink, okay? We're going to dive into the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is from the Old Testament. It's the second book in the Bible, and this is way before the time of Jesus. And here are some key things that are happening in Exodus. God is freeing the Hebrews from slavery to Egypt, led by this guy named Moses. God makes a covenant with these people. Covenant just means an agreement or a promise. And to receive instructions about this covenant, Moses would have meetings with God. This is where Moses would meet with God. Now, Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp, and whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances of their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Moses would enter this tent of meeting, where God's Spirit would enter, and they would speak to each other, face to face, like friends. Now, I want you to remember this story, because now we're going to jump ahead. Now we're going to jump all the way to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is the fourth account we have of the life of Jesus. And here's a little background on John. John is a Jewish man. John is a Hebrew man. John would be very, very, very familiar with the story of Exodus. Growing up, he would be taught and told this story time and time and time again. He would be very, very familiar with Hebrew concepts like the story of Exodus. Now, when John writes his gospel, he didn't write it in the Aramaic and Hebrew language that Exodus was written in. Instead, John writes his gospel in the Greek language. But even though John is writing his gospel in Greek, he would be thinking in Hebrew concepts. Oftentimes, when we read the New Testament authors, they are writing in Greek, but they are thinking in Hebrew concepts, okay? So just keep that in mind as we move forward. The point of John's gospel, the goal of his gospel, is to convince you as the reader that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God. And so he opens his gospel with a poem. And this poem is actually packed full of hyperlinks, but we're actually not going to have time to talk about all of them. But he starts off his gospel with this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, if we're reading this, we can probably just pick up on what John is saying here. The Word equals God, right? A little further down, he says this, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Now, on a surface level, we can see this and go, okay, if the Word is God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, then that means God became flesh and dwelt among us, right? It's a transitive property. A equals B, B equals C, A equals C. Never learned out on math, right? You get the idea. But what absolutely fascinates me, right, at least me, is that you can take this verse one step further by looking at just one word. So we're going to look at the word dwelt. Now in English, we can read dwelt and have this idea. Okay, yeah, the word was living nearby, right? We can understand that. But if you look at the Greek translation of this word, it actually means something different. And I know that's a little confusing, but sometimes Greek words don't translate well into English. And if you look at what dwelt literally translates to, it translates to this: living in a tent. The Word became flesh and lived in a tent. John is intentionally using this word. Does anybody remember a time where God lived in a tent? John is laying out for his audience that the very Spirit of God that came down in the tent way back in that Exodus story has now come down in the human form of Jesus. To meet with God, we used to have to go to a tent, but now we go to Jesus. This is fascinating to me. I love this stuff. What a crazy little detail that's packed into this verse that we would miss if we didn't dig, if we didn't try to find this hyperlink, if we only ever stuck with the English translation we had, right? How would you even go about finding a hyperlink like this? So I actually found this hyperlink by taking a class on Bible Project Classroom. Bible Project is a nonprofit organization. They make a lot of animations explaining different books of the Bible. But they also have this feature called the Bible Project Classroom. It's a place where you can take free collegiate-level courses taught by Bible scholars to learn about different biblical words, biblical themes, and different methods of study. And you can also use this app that they use in the class. It's called Logos. And Logos is an app where you can see the Bible in its original languages. And you can look at all the different meanings for all the original words. And you can actually see where these words show up all throughout the Bible. You can do all these different word studies with them. And then lastly, an awesome resource that I love that I'm sure everyone here's heard of at some point. Emily Keim got the whole church on it. Geez. faithma podcast. Everyone loves this podcast. This podcast, if you want to go deeper into like Hebrew concepts, Jewish concepts, rabbinical concepts, that is the whole point of this podcast, to look at the Bible through that lens. So, we did it, folks. We made it through all 3 levels. We completed the game. Congratulations. Yeah. That got a round of applause in Hopkins too. I'm just kidding. Okay. I'm very excited. We're all clapping about the win. It's a big W. But why should you care? Why does any of that matter? Why should you care about the hyperlinks in the Bible? Because when you read the Bible and you start making these connections, you're going to start to discover a couple things. The first is this: when you realize that the Bible, that was written across centuries and centuries and centuries by all these different people who never knew each other and weren't working together, somehow, some way, all of their works, past and present, not present, I guess future, connect, it becomes really hard to believe that the Bible was just written by a bunch of dudes. Really hard to believe this is just a human work. And you start to discover more and more that this Bible must be God-breathed. It must be inspired by God. And God, throughout centuries and centuries and centuries, partnered with his creation to perfectly piece this together. And the second thing, when you realize that God breathed the Bible is God-breathed, you start to make these connections, you find these clues, you find these hyperlinks, you follow the storyline, you are going to see that throughout centuries and centuries and centuries, God was beautifully and intentionally working to lead you to him, to be in relationship with you, Because from the beginning, that was the goal. That Jesus would come and bridge the gap between us and God. That Jesus would bridge the gap between me and God. And that he would bridge the gap between you and God. And so God packed every single Bible verse with all these little breadcrumbs, with all these little hyperlinks to point you to the bridge, to point you to Jesus. And we know this to be true. When you read a good book, when you watch a good show, when you watch a good movie, we pick up on all these little connections and hyperlinks that intertwine into the climax of that story, and it makes a significant impact on us. Those stories leave a mark. We tell them for generations and generations. We all love a good story, and God crafted the perfect one. Knowing or not knowing the hyperlinks in the Bible will impact your experience reading it. So how do you find those hyperlinks? Look for references in the text. As it was written, look for references to people or events that took place in the Bible, and go read them and come back to what you're reading. Get a good study Bible. Read some commentaries about what you're reading. And lastly, use another app. Get Logos, get Bible Project, get on the Bema podcast. I know like the entire church is already. But I know that when you find these connections, you will not look at the Bible the same. So, go read your Bible, go buy a Nintendo Switch and play all the Mario games, and then watch the movie and we can talk about it. Thanks, church.